Today, we're going to take, we're going to approach another aspect of what the world calls educational psychology. We're going to talk about objectives. These are going to come together with what we talked about last class period at the end of this period. We're going to tie them together. So, particularly the last half of last class period, when we talked about the cognitive domain. Who gets credit for writing the taxonomy of the cognitive domain? His last name starts with a letter near the beginning of the alphabet. That was supposed to help. Bloom. Bloom's taxonomy. Okay, that's not the most important thing to remember. I don't think that phrase is on the test. But it is important to remember because you will read something and it'll say Bloom's taxonomy says, and you should remember what Bloom's taxonomy is. There's 6 levels, 6 categories in Bloom's taxonomy. It's the taxonomy of the cognitive domain or the thinking domain. And rather than take the time to review through it, I'll just name them. You have entry level, knowledge, then comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. Those are the 6 categories in the cognitive domain. And when we finish talking about objectives, we're going to tie the idea of objectives back into those levels of the cognitive domain. Now, the first type of objective I'd like to tell you about is what is called a performance objective. Performance objective. The man who articulated what I'm going to tell you about performance objectives, his last name is Mager, M-A-G-E-R. So, this man, whose last name is Mager, is thinking about education and helping us measure what we're doing in a classroom or in a teaching situation, and he developed what he called, or what we call today, performance objectives. Before we go any further, I want each of you to get in mind something, some description of an objective. What is it that comes to your mind when I say objective? Amanda.
An objective?
Yes, an objective.
Trying to accomplish something.
That's, yep, trying to accomplish something. Someone else, a different, other phrase maybe. Bethany?
The goal of what you're doing.
The goal of what you're doing. Okay, anyone else with other words to describe that in your mind? Okay, that kind of is, we have an objective. It's what, the objective is what we're trying to accomplish, or the goal, we're aiming for it, something like that. We would hope that teachers, when they are teaching, are aiming to get something done, right? Sometime we might be in a class and we think that their aim or their goal or their objective is just to establish a good relationship with the students. You know, say things that are funny, get them to laugh, and we all like one another. Okay? But in school, we want to do more than just that. While rapport is important, and maybe it takes a whole class period to establish it, we want to be going somewhere, accomplishing something. Okay? So that's a good loose idea of what an objective is. Now, Mager developed a way to think about what I'm trying to accomplish that makes it more specific. How many of, if I said, think about something that you like, a subject, in a subject that you like, a part of that subject that you like, and teaching it to someone else. Okay? Now, describe for me what you want to accomplish. Right at this moment, we would probably ramble on and on and on and on trying to describe exactly what we want. Most likely. Maybe you wouldn't if you picked something that was super simple. But it's likely that we have this kind of a vague idea of what I'm trying to accomplish, what my goal is. And what Mager does is gives us 3 elements of condensing, thinking through what we're trying to accomplish, and putting it in basically one sentence. So I can concisely and clearly say, this is what I'm trying to do today. And that's helpful for a teacher. If you walk in the classroom and you say, today I'm going to teach them about multiplication. Well, that's a wide range of something. Even if your exercises are about a certain part, if you just think, I'm going to teach about multiplication, you can get off track. You can say things that are true but that aren't really aren't really going to help them with the assignment, with the drill and all that's going to come afterward and all that. But if we can say, well, it's more than multiplication. My objective is for them to be able to do this under these conditions to this level of proficiency. We'll have a real clear goal, a real clear idea of what we're trying to accomplish. And those things that I said are, in general terms, the 3 elements of a performance objective. First of all, 3 parts of a performance objective. First is an observable behavior. An observable behavior. Just put that down there and we'll describe what that is. So as a teacher, I want them to do something that I can observe. Right? An observable behavior. Barrick.
Can you please repeat what you said we're going over, or what the
Performance objectives.
before that? Was that the idea?
Objectives.
Okay.
We're going to talk about objectives. There's 2 different types. First, we're going to talk about performance objectives, and then the second type, and we're going to tie those into the cognitive domain at the end. So that's where we're going. That's where we're going. Okay. So, performance objectives, Mager, the first element of writing or articulating a performance objective is an observable behavior. Now, let's all try to come up with an observable behavior. Again, I want you to pick a subject that you're studying for, or a subject, and let's think more of an academic type subject that you like, okay, because you're not all studying to teach, but you like a certain type of subject. And I want you to think of an observable behavior that you could teach about and then see, or not necessarily see, but something that's observable. See, hear, whatever, something along those lines, the people that you teach do. Okay? So I'll give you a few seconds to think about that. All right. Now, I think that what I've asked you to do is really, really simple. But I'm sure that I didn't describe it in the best way, and some of you are thinking, what in the world is he talking about? Is there anybody here that's saying, what in the world is he talking about, is willing for me to help you? Okay, there's a lot. I have a lot of people that want me to help them. Let's take Nicole. Okay? Tell me a subject that you like. Math, okay. We're all familiar with math, right? We're at least familiar, so, okay. We've had to do it once or twice in the past. Okay, so math. What part of math should we think about? That's elementary arithmetic? Okay, elementary arithmetic. If we're teaching an arithmetic class in elementary, let's say, I don't know, first, second, third, fourth, something in there, range, what is something that we could be teaching them about?
Like a specific area of math?
Yeah, mm-hmm.
Fractions?
Fractions, okay, so that's probably more like 4th, 5th, 6th grade. But fractions, that's fine. Fractions. Now, how many are lost now? Okay, we all understand fractions? Partially. We remember being taught about fractions. Okay. How many are in primary or teaching primary or teaching intermediate math right now? Okay. So have you talked about fractions since the semester? I'm sorry? In intermediate, yeah. So how many are in intermediate math, teaching intermediate math?
There's only 3 of us. And then Meadow.
Okay, yeah. So fractions. What is a concept or something that needs to be learned if we're going to understand fractions? How to reduce them.
Before that, I would say the parts of a fraction, what the numerator is and when.
Okay, so the parts of a fraction. So let's say that today I'm going to teach about the parts of a fraction. Maybe it's the very first day that we're going to talk about fractions. Okay, so I want to teach them about the parts of a fraction. That's kind of vague, though, isn't it? Okay, so what is it? If I have taught them, and we know what a fraction is, right? Everybody should be able to stay with me here. If I have taught them about fractions and the parts of a fraction, what should they be able to do? What should they be able to do that I can see that they know the parts of a fraction? Okay? Think about that. You might say it in a few different ways, but we'll take the first guy to want to throw out something.
They could write the fraction on the paper if you ask them to write 1/2 or something. They
Okay.
could physically
Okay, so let's be real specific. If they wrote a fraction on the page, would they be showing you that they know the parts of a fraction? No. No, they wouldn't, would they? Okay, so we're being extra particular here. Okay, they would be showing you that they know what a fraction looks like. Okay, they would be write a fraction. Okay, so let's take the guys. We don't think of the guys as being the teaching elementary math type.
Being able to point out which one's the numerator, which one's the denominator.
Okay, being able to point out. What would be another word for point out? No, that's exactly what we would say, but what would be a different, more educational word for point out? Label. Okay, label or what? Identify. That's the word I was thinking of. What were you going to say? Name. Okay. So if we're teaching the parts of a fraction, our objective is that they can identify the parts of a fraction or name or label the parts of a fraction. Does that seem like a good something? I mean, and that's an observable behavior, right? We could give them 10 fractions with little lines next to the different parts, and they could label them. Or we could give them 1, okay, right? So that's an observable behavior. So we're going to say labeling fractions is our example for the rest of this. The second part of the performance objective are the conditions of accomplishment. The conditions of accomplishment. If you go back to the observable behavior, normally you're going to use an action verb in that part of the sentence. An action verb. Okay, and that's why we would say name, label, identify. Those are action verbs. That's going to help us. That's what we're going to observe them doing. The conditions of accomplishment include things like the materials, the time, or maybe we'd say the time limit, the location, so using a pencil and paper, okay? Using a pencil and a handout with fractions supplied, students will be able to label the parts, correctly label the parts of a fraction, something like that. Because could you, now we almost immediately think of using pencil and paper in this, or writing instrument and paper for this, right? But could we observe the labeling of fractions using different materials? Okay? So, if I just did this, that's hard. Let's make it easier for the kids. Okay? And I use my pointer. They could verbally do it, couldn't they? Okay? So you understand the difference between verbal, written. It still has to do with their memory and what they know, right? But the conditions of accomplishment. So, and normally the conditions of accomplishment comes first in the statement. Okay? So in the actual performance objective. The performance objective is going to say, under these conditions, the students will do this, observable behavior. So under these conditions, the conditions of accomplishment, students will do this, the observable behavior. Okay? And then the third part is to an acceptable level of proficiency. An acceptable level of proficiency. Okay? So that means, how many mistakes am I going to allow them to make before moving on? So, if we have our name the parts of a fraction lesson, okay, and for my performance objective, I want them to, on a homework assignment sheet, worksheet, I want them to correctly identify the parts of the fractions. Okay, so using a homework assignment sheet, paper, and if we wanted to say they should know it so well they can do it in 10 minutes, the whole sheet, so I'm going to take the last 10 minutes to measure, or the first 10 minutes of the next day to measure, something like that. You can put a time limit on it. Maybe we don't care how long it takes, but either way, using the homework sheet that I've provided, they're going to correctly identify the parts of the fraction to what level of proficiency? What level of proficiency should we accept? What do you think? What level of proficiency should we accept? Mary.
So they're all correct?
Till they're all, so 100% proficiency. You don't know. That's fine. That's a good answer, though. What she just described is what we call mastery learning. Mastery learning. Okay? I don't think, so what that means is that I have a class of 10. They all have to get a 100%, or we're going over it again. Okay? Until the whole class has mastered the concept. When they get 100%, I know they've mastered the concept, and then we'll move on. Okay? That was kind of a trick question, but it worked. Because I wanted you to understand. Acceptable, not what I would love for them all to get a 100%. But what will I accept? Okay? Will I accept a 70? Okay? If I say, I'll accept a 70, if somebody comes along with a 65, I didn't teach it well enough, they didn't learn it well enough, we need to do this until we get a 70. Acceptable level. Now, how do we measure that? If there's a 60, I mean, if it was like the whole class gets hundreds and 165, well, then the average is above 70. I'm not going to go into that, how we decide whether we've met it. But the idea of an acceptable level of proficiency is a percentage or a number correct out of whatever, and the idea is that we haven't accomplished our objective if we don't meet that level of proficiency. What we will accept. So, the acceptable level of proficiency is the minimum that we will accept. Will we accept a C, a D, a B? whatever we say in our objective, which should be stated before we start grading the papers, we're on our honor to stick to that. Obviously, if you didn't meet the objective, or the students didn't meet the objective, you can move on. But if we're thinking about the law of the lesson, which we're going to talk about a while down here, when we're teaching, you have to start with what's known and then go to the unknown. If you taught something and half the class really doesn't know it, you really shouldn't be moving on, right? Because what you're moving to is assuming that they know what you already taught. Okay? So but we're dealing with human beings. Not every single person is going to get a 100%, right? So we have to, in a classroom situation, figure out what level of proficiency will we say, okay, I think we've got it. We have it well enough. We can move on to the next thing. Okay? So, 3 parts to a performance objective. An observable behavior. That's something that we can observe them doing. The conditions of accomplishment. And the acceptable level of proficiency. Now, when you think about these aspects of a performance objective, I want you to think of the types of learning activities or teaching activities that we will be able to measure, that we'll be able to write a performance objective about. Everybody should be able to think of something. We already thought of one, labeling the parts of a fraction. Okay? Now, so I asked you at the beginning to think of one. I didn't ask for one then. Okay? But we helped Nicole through the idea of what I mean by that. Now I want everybody to think of something. It's not difficult. Think of a very simple thing if you need to. In fact, I'll give you a hint. You almost have to think of a very simple thing. Is this an example or a question? Okay, let's wait. I want to get more involved. Let's do this. If you're still thinking, look at your desk or your something. If you think you have an example, look at me. Isn't school so hard? Make you think when you come to class. All right. Not everybody has gotten an example, but if you have, even if you haven't, I'd like you to turn to a neighbor and tell them what that example is. If you didn't get an example, listen to what your neighbor got, and then all of a sudden you're going to think, oh, I could have thought of something like that. Go ahead. All right. So, hopefully you remember what you heard from your neighbor. And I want to hear a couple of those examples. Sarah, what did you hear as an example of something that we could measure with a performance objective?
A choir teacher can see when their students are slouching, when they should be sitting up straight to sing.
So we're going to teach them posture. And we're going to measure that. Okay? So it is observable. We can observe whether they're slouching or have good posture. I guess we could say we're going to quiz you on what good posture is. We observe it. on a certain number of points. Knees, body, head, chin, shoulders. And we want a certain level of proficiency. Okay? That's a little, that's not what we would normally think of because it's kind of in the arts area, music, right? Okay. But I think we can do that. The problem with that is so much human nature is involved there is that even if you taught it one day, the next day you're going to have to teach it again and again and again and again. But it's still, if we're actually just teaching, if we're just teaching it, we can teach them what they ought to know, and they can conform their body and demonstrate that they know it, right? Okay. Joy, what did you hear?
Teaching a student
How to type.
Yeah, and you teach them first where all the letters are on the keyboard.
Okay, so that's like almost a whole class. But if we brought it down to one class period, and who did you hear this from? So I can, you? Okay, so if we brought it down to one class period, we could say we want them to learn the K stroke to a certain level of proficiency, right? Or we might even think, well, I could probably teach more than just the K stroke in one class period. The home keys, or the left-hand home keys, or something in one class period. So that is something we can observe. We can they do it, we look at it, or we look on the screen at it, whatever, and to a certain level of proficiency. Okay, so that's good. That's something that we can see being done. Someone else. Let's see here. Want to tell me what you heard? You don't want to snitch on your neighbors?
She said being able to list out the different things like subject, noun, verb, things like that, and then be able to see that by diagramming sentences.
Okay,
So you can't probably diagram a sentence if you don't know the specific parts.
Okay, so there's a whole bunch of things there. That's more than one thing. So we're either do you want them to identify the parts of a sentence?
Well, I was saying the observable behavior would be if they can diagram a sentence, so that would show that you did teach them what each part of the sentence is and how to properly pick it out. Does that make sense?
No, it does. It does kind of make sense.
Teach them like what a noun is, what a verb is, what an object is, and then they would have to apply it.
Okay. So you're trying to teach them two things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, you want them to be able to identify what a noun is, a verb, and all of those things. But then, and then you also want them to identify the parts of a sentence, two different things.
How it's used in the sentence.
Right. That's two different things. One is syntax, one is word usage. But this is an English class. So you want them to say, how's this used? So you're going to have subjects, predicates, direct objects, indirect objects, all of those types of things. Okay. But you want them to do more than just identify it, right? Because we could take a sentence and say, this is the S, and you've probably done this, V, D, O, I, O, whatever, right? Okay, we could just identify it. Okay, that's easily measurable. Okay, but then you said something about diagramming. Okay, so then we want them to be able to take those parts and put them into a diagram. All right, diagramming is excellent tool. It's one of the best of tools. What are we measuring when we have them diagramming? What is the diagramming proving to us?
Their ability to pick out the parts of speech or pick out the verbs and objects.
Are you an English major?
No.
Okay, no, that's fine. You just had to diagram when you were younger. Anybody here an English major? Okay, Joy, can you help us here a little bit? You don't have to defend what she's saying. Just help us understand. If you're going to use diagramming, what is that showing you?
It shows that the student knows the function of every word in a sentence.
They know the function of every word in the sentence.
And how it relates to their subject and
and their relationship to each other. Okay, so the performance objective is that, or the objective is that students it would be, this is real rough, I haven't thought it through, but something like using a diagram exercise, students would demonstrate their understanding of the relationship between words in a sentence to a certain, okay. All right, so this is really a super example. Isn't that hard? Doesn't that doesn't really make sense, because their understanding is little more, could they get it right once and not really know what they're talking about? They could kind of just guess that, well, it seems like it would go here, and not really understand the relationship between words. Yeah. Now, this is a rhetorical question. Are there other subjects like that we can't really observe them actually doing, actually performing what we're trying to teach? What do you think my objective is in this classroom? Could I observe, if I said, I want to accomplish, I want to change and influence the understanding and beliefs of my students, how can I observe that? Can I observe that? No, I can't. I can't observe that. Okay? Because if I said, I want my students to be able to name, and might even be able to say, identify the 3 parts of Mager's performance objective, I could probably measure that, right? And I could give you several objectives, and you could put parentheses around the different parts and identify them. Observable behavior, conditions of accomplishment, acceptable level of proficiency. Okay. But many times we're doing more than teaching just the nuts and bolts of something, aren't we? In elementary school, performance objectives serve us very well in elementary school. See, they have a deficiency. Performance objectives have a deficiency. And that is that they can accurately only measure things that you can see. Okay? If I say I want my students to understand the idea of government by the people, I could have them write an essay. But would I know that they understand that? No. So should I just not try to teach that since I can't know whether they understand it or not? No. Okay, right? But when we're teaching, performance objectives are super. But when they came on the scene and were articulated, people thought, these are great. This is a super tool, and it is a super tool. But if we try to put this super tool on everything that we're trying to teach, we're going to dumb down some of the things that we're trying to teach. If I want to teach analysis, if I'm teaching on an analytical level, how do I write a performance objective on an analytical level thinking process? I can't really know. I mean, I can't really see the analysis taking place. I can see the results of what they did, but I don't know really how they've analyzed something, if they're actually analyzing or if they're just guessing. Because there's a slight chance that they could guess and get it right. Okay. I guess there's a chance that they could guess at the identification of the parts of a fraction and get it right. But if they guess the same for all 10 of them, that's an acceptable level of proficiency for me. So what I'm describing is the problem that once people dove headlong into using performance objectives, they realized that that while they were good in certain situations, they didn't really work in a lot of other situations. Okay? And so when we're at just what I would say, going back to our 6 categories of mental knowledge, when we're dealing with the knowledge level, just the beginning, we can identify that. We can measure that. If it's American geography, I can say, I want the students to name the 50 states. And I can identify that they have written them all down, or they have verbally said them. I can even add to that they can produce the capitals with the states, with the corresponding states. We can do that. But then explaining how or why the geography affects a certain, knowing that in Alaska they use certain types of building material and explaining why are 2 different things, right? Okay, so in 3rd grade, we say Alaska. I'm going to say it wrong. Juneau. Is that how you say it? Okay? Our Alaskan says that's how you say it. Capital of Alaska is Juneau. The state bird. Yeah, who knows? She's got an excuse. She lived in PNG when she was supposed to be taking state history and geography. Anyway, I'm just teasing a little bit there. But we can know all that stuff, but then to understand why things happen, why are there a lot of people in Anchorage? It's on the coast. Okay? It's a little warmer. Okay? As opposed to Fairbanks. Okay? Fairbanks is a big city. Why is Fairbanks a bigger city even though it's away from the coast and it's large? I'm sure there are geographical reasons for that. Okay? There has to be geographical reasons for that. But that a student understands that and can explain it is not something that I'm going to be able to really observe that knowledge, because it's more than just knowing. Knowing that Fairbanks is there and Anchorage is there is one thing. Explaining why is another thing. And we want to be teaching more than just knowing something. In fact, we are teaching more than just knowing something. Almost even in the younger ages, but for sure from about 5th grade on, we're teaching more than just knowledge. Now, sometimes we get knowledge and then we go from there. Today, you received some just plain old knowledge, the 3 parts of a performance objective. But we want to go beyond that.